Jake Morrison had 3 rules for surviving as a maintenance worker on Deep Space Station Harmony. Keep your head down, fix what's broken, and never, under any circumstances, get involved in alien drama. Unfortunately for Jake, the universe had apparently missed that memo. He was elbow-deep in an air recycling unit, cursing at whoever designed alien technology with the engineering prowess of a drunk toddler, when the fire alarm started shrieking. Not the gentle, hey, maybe check this out chime, but the full, everyone's about to die horribly, banshee wail that made your teeth ache. Oh, come on, Jake muttered, pulling his head out of the machinery. I literally just wanted to replace a filter. 1 filter. Is that too much to ask the universe? The emergency lights bathed everything in that lovely shade of red that screamed impending doom, and Jake could smell smoke drifting through the station's ventilation system. He grabbed his toolkit and headed toward the source, because apparently his survival instincts had been replaced with whatever genetic defect made humans run toward danger instead of away from it. The residential quarters for alien families were a mess of twisted metal and sparking electronics. A coolant line had burst and somehow caught fire, because physics in space was apparently just a suggestion. Through the smoke and chaos, Jake heard something that made his blood freeze. A high-pitched whimpering that sounded exactly like his neighbor's cat back on Earth when it got stuck in a tree. Oh hell no, Jake said to nobody in particular. I am not dying for some alien's pet. But then he saw it. A tiny ball of silver fur, no bigger than a house cat, trapped behind a sheet of burning metal debris. The little creature had enormous purple eyes that seemed to take up half its face, and it was making the most pathetic mewing sounds Jake had ever heard. Damn it, Jake sighed, because he apparently had the self-preservation instincts of a lemming. He grabbed a fire suppression canister and started spraying foam at the flames, clearing a path to the trapped creature. The thing about being human, Jake reflected as he crawled through superheated metal and toxic smoke, is that evolution had apparently decided to wire their brains with a save the cute thing protocol that overrode basic common sense. The little furball reminded him way too much of Mr. Whiskers, his elderly neighbor's perpetually dramatic Persian cat, that somehow always ended up in Jake's apartment demanding food and attention. Come here, you little disaster magnet, Jake muttered, scooping up the trembling alien cub. It immediately latched onto his maintenance coveralls with tiny claws and buried its face in his chest, purring like a miniature engine. The fire suppression systems finally kicked in, dousing everything in flame-retardant foam that smelled like synthetic lemons and regret. Jake emerged from the wreckage, looking like he'd been dunked in a vat of cleaning supplies, with one very relieved alien cub clinging to him like he was the last life preserver on a sinking ship. There you go, little guy, Jake said, trying to pry the creature loose. Crisis over. Time to find your parents and pretend this never happened. The cub looked up at him with those ridiculously large eyes and made a sound that was somewhere between a purr and a chirp. If Jake didn't know better, he'd swear the little thing was trying to say thank you. Yeah, you're welcome, Jake grumbled. Now let's get you back to whoever's supposed to be watching you, so I can go back to fixing things that actually make sense. He had no idea that he'd just accidentally become the most important human in galactic history. All he wanted was to finish installing that stupid air filter. Jake thought the whole incident was over. He'd dropped off the cub with station security, filed his incident report, and was looking forward to 48 hours of blissful anonymity while he caught up on his backlog of broken equipment. The universe, however, had other plans. He was halfway through rewiring a malfunctioning coffee dispenser when his door chimed. Not the polite, someone's here to see you chime, but the formal, prepare for diplomatic contact sequence that usually meant someone important wanted to make his life complicated. Oh, what now? Jake groaned, opening the door to find what could only be described as an alien parade. 2 adult Flufarians stood at the front, both easily twice the size of the cub he'd rescued, with the same silver fur and purple eyes, but wearing elaborate ceremonial robes that sparkled with embedded crystals. Behind them stood at least 20 more aliens of various species, all looking at Jake like he'd just descended from heaven riding a unicorn. Greetings, Death Guardian Morrison, the larger Flufarian said in accented but perfect English. I am Commander Fuzz of the Flufarian Diplomatic Corps, and this is my mate, Dr. Whiskers of the Medical Division. You saved our offspring, Pip. Jake blinked. I'm sorry, did you just call me Death Guardian? Indeed, Dr. Whiskers chimed in, her voice melodic and formal. By the ancient laws of our people, anyone who saves a Flufarian life becomes that individual's Death Guardian. You are now responsible for preventing Pip's death for the remainder of his natural lifespan. I'm sorry, what now? Jake's brain was having trouble processing this information. I just pulled the kid out of a fire. It's not like I signed a contract or anything. Commander Fuzz tilted his head, an expression of genuine confusion crossing his furry features. But you deliberately placed yourself in mortal danger to preserve our child's life. This is the highest honor our species can bestow. You are now Uncle Death to little Pip. Uncle Death? Jake repeated, wondering if he was having some kind of breakdown. That's the worst superhero name I've ever heard. It is not a superhero designation, Dr. Whiskers explained patiently. It is a sacred familial bond. You are now part of our pack structure. Pip will look to you for protection from all forms of death and danger until he reaches maturity in approximately 80 of your Earth years. Jake felt a headache building behind his eyes. Look, I appreciate the gesture, but I really just did what any decent person would do. It's called basic human compassion. We help each other out. It's not some mystical cosmic responsibility thing. The assembled aliens exchanged confused glances. Commander Fuzz leaned forward slightly. You mean to tell us that humans regularly risk their lives for strangers with no expectation of reward or recognition? Well, yeah. Most of the time, anyway. It's just what you do. Fascinating, Dr. Whiskers whispered, pulling out what looked like a crystalline recording device. Commander, we may need to contact the xenobiology department. This behavior pattern is unprecedented among known sapient species. At that moment, little Pip came running through the crowd and launched himself at Jake's legs, wrapping his tiny arms around Jake's knee and purring like a tiny diesel engine. Uncle Death, Uncle Death, the cub squeaked in adorable broken English. You smell like metal soap and sadness. I love you. Jake looked down at the impossibly cute alien child clinging to his leg, then up at the 24 aliens staring at him with expressions ranging from awe to scientific fascination, and realized his quiet life of fixing broken things was officially over. This is not what I signed up for, he muttered. The ceremony will be held tomorrow at 1400 hours, Commander Fuzz announced happily. The entire Flafarian community on this station will attend to witness the formal bonding ritual. What ceremony? Jake asked, but somehow he already knew he wasn't going to like the answer. The ceremony, as it turned out, was exactly as ridiculous as Jake had feared. The station's main assembly hall had been decorated with what appeared to be every shiny object the Flafarian community could find, creating a disco ball effect that made Jake's eyes water. Worse, word had somehow spread beyond the station. How? Jake asked Commander Fuzz, staring at the growing crowd of alien families. Did half the sector find out about this? Oh, we sent the story to the Galactic News Network, Dr. Whiskers replied cheerfully. The tale of the human who conquered fire itself to save a Flufarian child has become quite popular, very inspiring. I didn't conquer fire, Jake protested. I used a fire extinguisher. It's literally designed for that purpose. But nobody seemed to be listening. The news reports had gotten increasingly dramatic with each retelling. According to the latest broadcast, Jake had apparently wrestled the flames with his bare hands and stared death itself in the eye before banishing it to the void. The reporter, an enthusiastic slug-like creature named Blurble McNews, had described Jake as a mysterious human warrior whose very presence causes death to flee in terror. The really problematic part was that other Flufarian families had started showing up. A lot of them. Uncle Death! Uncle Death! A chorus of tiny voices called out as Jake tried to make his way through the crowd. Apparently every Flafarian parent in 3 star systems had decided their cubs needed death protection blessings from the legendary human. Jake found himself surrounded by a sea of fuzzy alien children, all looking up at him with those ridiculously large purple eyes and making purring sounds that somehow managed to be both adorable and deeply unsettling when multiplied by 40. This is getting out of hand, Jake muttered as a particularly small cub climbed up his leg like he was a tree. Uncle Death, the tiny climber squeaked, will you protect me from the scary vacuum of space? And me from asteroid impacts, added another. What about meteor showers? Solar flares. Behemoth, death of the universe. Okay, slow down there, kids, Jake said, trying to gently detach the various cubs who had decided he was now a jungle gym. I'm just a maintenance guy. I fix air recyclers and coffee machines. I don't control cosmic phenomena. The cubs stared at him in confusion, as if he'd just claimed the sky was plaid. But you defeated fire, a slightly older cub pointed out logically. Fire is plasma, which is the 4th state of matter. If you can control plasma, surely you can handle simple gravitational anomalies. Jake looked around desperately for help, but Commander Fuzz and Dr. Whiskers were busy giving interviews to an increasingly large crowd of galactic journalists. He caught fragments of their conversation. Yes, humans appear to have an instinctive response to protect other species, even at great personal risk. We believe this may be linked to their predator evolution, channeling hunting instincts into protective behaviors. The implications for galactic security are staggering. Meanwhile, Jake was being slowly buried under an avalanche of alien children who seemed convinced he was their personal shield against the universe's many dangers. Every few minutes, another family would arrive, having traveled impossible distances just to have their cubs meet the legendary Uncle Death. "Look," Jake said to the assembled cubs, trying to maintain some semblance of authority while a particularly determined youngster braided his hair. "I can't actually protect you from everything dangerous in the universe. That's not how physics works." "But you saved Pip from certain death," a cub pointed out. "That was just basic fire safety procedures. You charged into flames without hesitation. I had a fire extinguisher. You wrestled death itself and emerged victorious. That's not... Where are you even getting this stuff?" One of the cubs helpfully held up a holographic newspad showing Jake's heroic rescue, which had somehow been edited to include dramatic music, slow-motion effects, and what appeared to be actual explosions that definitely hadn't been there at the time. Jake stared at the screen in horror. That's not even remotely what happened. "Uncle Death is modest about his incredible powers," Pip announced proudly to the group, having appointed himself as Jake's official translator to the other cubs. "He pretends to be a simple maintenance human, to avoid drawing attention from his enemies." "What enemies?" Jake asked. "Death, obviously," Pip replied, as if Jake was being particularly slow. "Death is probably really mad that you keep defeating it all the time." Jake looked around at the dozens of furry faces staring at him with absolute faith and adoration, at the growing crowd of reporters documenting his every word, and at the stack of Uncle Death protection request forms that had somehow appeared on a nearby table. "I just wanted to fix an air filter," he said to nobody in particular. But as annoying as the whole situation was, Jake had to admit there was something oddly touching about being surrounded by creatures who trusted him completely, even if that trust was based on a massive misunderstanding about his ability to punch cosmic forces in the face. Jake should have known things were about to get exponentially worse when Station Commander Grolk called him to the administrative offices with the kind of nervous energy usually reserved for tax audits and surprise inspections from his mother-in-law. The commander, a 7-foot-tall reptilian whose species had evolved from something that probably ate smaller reptilians for breakfast, was pacing behind his desk like a caged animal. "Morrison," Grolk began, his voice carrying that special tone that meant Jake's day was about to become significantly more complicated, "we have a situation. If this is about the cubs using the maintenance shafts as playground equipment, I've already told them that's a safety violation," Jake said, dropping into the chair across from Grolk's desk. "It's not about the cubs." Grolk activated his holographic display, and Jake's stomach dropped as he saw his own face plastered across what appeared to be every major news network in the galaxy. "It's about this." The headlines were even worse than Jake had feared. "Human death warrior emerges from unknown species. Mysterious Proctor pesticides discovered in Outer Rim." And his personal favorite, "Is humanity the galaxy's secret guardian race?" "Oh, come on," Jake groaned. "I saved one kid from a fire. How did this turn into me being part of some secret warrior civilization?" "Well," Grolk said diplomatically, "when the Flafarian News Service reported that you charged into plasma flames without protective equipment, fought death itself in single combat, and emerged victorious while carrying a helpless child to safety, certain parties took notice." Before Jake could explain that literally none of that was accurate, the office door chimed with the kind of official tone that made everyone in the room stand up straighter. A massive alien in what could only be described as the most over-decorated military uniform Jake had ever seen strode into the room. The creature looked like someone had crossed an octopus with a filing cabinet and given it delusions of grandeur. "I am Admiral Grumpus of the Galactic Security Council," the newcomer announced in a voice that sounded like gravel being processed through a bureaucratic paper shredder. "I am here to investigate reports of a previously unknown warrior species operating in violation of the Galactic Species Registration Protocol." Jake looked at Grolk, who had developed the expression of someone who desperately wished he'd called in sick today. "Admiral, this is Jake Morrison, the human in question." Admiral Grumpus turned his attention to Jake, studying him with the kind of intense scrutiny usually reserved for dangerous criminals or expired lunch meat. "You are smaller than expected for a death warrior." "That's because I'm not a death warrior," Jake replied. "I'm a maintenance technician. I fix things that are broken. Sometimes those things happen to be on fire." "Ah," Admiral Grumpus said, pulling out what appeared to be an official form the size of a small table. Attempting to conceal your true nature. Standard warrior class behavior. Please state your species' military capabilities for the official record. We don't have military capabilities. What we do, but they're not supernatural. We're just people who figured out how to make tools and occasionally help each other out. Admiral Grumpus made a note on his form with a writing implement that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd heard a description of a pen but had never actually seen one. Modest deflection, also standard warrior behavior. What is your species' method for defeating death itself? Jake rubbed his temples, feeling a headache building. We don't defeat death. Nobody defeats death. Death is a fundamental biological process that happens to all living things eventually. But you defeated fire death, Admiral Grumpus pointed out. I put out a fire with a fire extinguisher. It's a tool specifically designed to remove the chemical reaction that causes combustion. Basic chemistry, not mystical death wrestling. Admiral Grumpus stared at him for a long moment. You mean to tell me that your species has developed technology capable of stopping plasma-based molecular destruction? I mean, we figured out how to spray foam on burning things, yes. Incredible, the Admiral whispered, making more notes. And this technology is widely available among your people? You can buy a fire extinguisher at pretty much any hardware store, yeah. Admiral Grumpus nearly dropped his pen thing. Your species has weaponized anti-death technology and made it commercially available to civilians? It's not weaponized, it's safety equipment. The whole point is to prevent people from getting hurt. Ah, a society of professional death preventers, Admiral Grumpus nodded sagely. This explains the reports of humans engaging in helping behavior throughout the galaxy. You are all members of an anti-death military organization. Jake looked desperately at Grulk, who shrugged in the universal gesture of, "You're on your own, buddy." Look, Jake said, trying to find some way to explain basic human decency to a creature who apparently considered kindness a military tactic. Humans help each other because we're social creatures. We evolved in groups. Helping others helps the group survive. It's not complicated. So, your entire species is trained from birth in group survival tactics, Admiral Grumpus said, writing furiously. Fascinating. And this Jake Morrison individual represents your species' standard capabilities? God, I hope not, Jake muttered. He's being modest again. Canderfuss's voice came from the doorway. The Fluffarian had apparently been listening to the entire conversation. Uncle Death's powers are clearly far beyond normal human capabilities. He has personally prevented 17 potential deaths just this morning. 17? Jake spun around. What are you talking about? Well, you fixed the atmospheric recycling unit, preventing potential asphyxiation. You repaired the gravity generator, preventing potential floating injuries. You calibrated the water purification system, preventing potential contamination death. Shall I continue? Jake stared at him. That's called doing my job. His job, Admiral Grumpus noted, that consists entirely of preventing various forms of death through technical expertise. This confirms our assessment that humans are a guardian species. At that moment, Pip came running into the office, followed by at least a dozen other cubs, who had apparently decided that wherever Uncle Death went, they needed to be also. Uncle Death! Pip squeaked, launching himself at Jake's legs. We heard you were talking to the scary military alien. Are you going to protect us from bureaucratic death? Admiral Grumpus looked at the cubs, then at Jake, then back at the cubs. The young ones instinctively seek protection from your kind. This is definitive proof of humanity's role as a guardian species. No, it's proof that I accidentally became the galaxy's most reluctant babysitter, Jake said. But he was already picking up Pip and letting the other cubs cluster around his feet. Admiral Grumpus made a final note on his massive form. Based on this investigation, I am recommending that humanity be classified as a Class A guardian species and nominated for the Galactic Protector Award. The ceremony will be held on the capital world of Bureaucratica Prime in 30 standard days. What if I don't want to go? Jake asked. An attendance is mandatory for all nominated guardian entities, Admiral Grumpus replied cheerfully. Congratulations, Jake Morrison. You are now officially the galaxy's most important human. Jake looked down at the cubs surrounding him, up at the Admiral's pleased expression, and over at Commander Grulk's sympathetic grimace. I really just wanted to fix that air filter. Jake had exactly 12 days of peace before the universe decided to test whether he actually deserved his new title as Galaxy's most important human. He was in the middle of explaining to a group of cubs why he couldn't actually prevent them from stubbing their toes, when every alarm on the station started screaming at once. This wasn't the polite "something's broken" alarm, or even the dramatic "everyone might die" alarm. This was the rarely heard "oh God, we're all completely screwed" alarm that most people hoped never to experience firsthand. Station Commander Grok's voice crackled over the intercom, and Jake had never heard the usually unflappable reptilian sound genuinely terrified before. "All personnel to emergency stations. We have received a priority distress call from the Flufarian homeworld. A Class 12 space plague has been detected in their primary population centers. Estimated time to total species extinction, 72 hours. Jake felt his blood turn to ice water. Around him, the cubs had gone completely silent, their normally vibrant purple eyes wide with fear. Pip climbed up Jake's leg and clung to his shirt, trembling. "Uncle Death," Pip whispered, "are we all going to die?" Before Jake could answer, Commander Fuzz and Dr. Whiskers came running into the maintenance bay, both looking like they'd aged 10 years in the past 10 minutes. "Jake," Commander Fuzz said, his usual formal composure completely gone. "Our homeworld is dying. The plague is unlike anything we've ever encountered. It attacks our cellular structure at the molecular level, and our best scientists estimate we have less than 3 standard days before total population collapse." "That's terrible," Jake said, his mind racing. "What can I do to help? I mean, I'm not a doctor or scientist, but if there's anything—" "Your Uncle Death," Dr. Whiskers interrupted, tears streaming down her furry cheeks. "You're the human who defeated death itself. If anyone can save our people, it's you." Jake stared at them, feeling the weight of an entire species' hope settling on his shoulders like a concrete blanket. "I'm not actually magic, you know. I can't just wave my hands and cure space plagues." "But you understand systems," Commander Fuzz said desperately. "You fix things that are broken. Our entire world is broken right now." Jake looked around at the cubs, all staring at him with absolute faith that somehow, some way, Uncle Death would make everything okay. The problem was, Jake had absolutely no idea how to cure a space plague. He barely understood how to cure a common cold. But then his maintenance-trained brain started working. "Okay," he said slowly, "I can't cure the plague, but maybe I can help coordinate the response. What resources do we have?" The next 18 hours were a blur of frantic activity that made Jake's previous life of simple equipment repairs seem quaint by comparison. He found himself at the center of the largest emergency medical operation in galactic history, not because he had any medical knowledge, but because he was apparently the only person who could get different alien species to actually cooperate. "The Crystalline Collective has the molecular scanners we need," Jake said, staring at a holographic display that showed the growing crisis on the Flufarian homeworld. "But they won't share technology with the Silicon Empire because of some trade dispute from 2 centuries ago." "Impossible to resolve," Admiral Grumpus declared from his position at the Emergency Command Center. "The bureaucratic protocols alone would take months." "Not if we don't go through bureaucratic protocols," Jake replied, already pulling up communication channels. "Sometimes you just have to ask people nicely." What followed was the most exhausting diplomatic marathon of Jake's life. He spent hours on subspace calls explaining to increasingly confused alien officials that sometimes helping people was more important than ancient grudges or trade regulations. He had to convince the Gaseous Confederation to donate their atmospheric purification technology, talk the Robotic Union into lending their precision manufacturing equipment, and somehow persuade the notoriously isolationist quantum monks to share their advanced computational models. The thing that surprised everyone, including Jake, was that it actually worked. Not because Jake was some brilliant negotiator, but because he approached every conversation with the basic assumption that most people, when you explained the situation clearly, wanted to help save lives. "How did you get the Silicon Empire to agree to work with the Crystalline Collective?" Dr. Whiskers asked during one of Jake's brief breaks from coordination duties. "I told them about the cubs," Jake said simply. "I explained that there were children involved, and that their technology could save innocent lives. Turns out, most people don't want kids to die, even if they're not technically their own species' kids." "Remarkable," Admiral Grumpus noted, frantically taking notes. "Human diplomatic strategy involves emotional appeals to cross-species parental instincts." "It's not a strategy," Jake said tiredly. "It's just basic empathy." By the 40-hour mark, they had assembled the most diverse scientific task force in galactic history. Crystalline researchers worked alongside silicon engineers, while gaseous atmospheric specialists collaborated with robotic manufacturers to create a delivery system for the experimental cure that the quantum monks' computers had helped design. Jake didn't understand half of what they were doing, But he kept the coffee flowing, made sure everyone had food that wouldn't poison them, and solved the endless stream of logistical problems that threatened to derail the entire operation. The quantum phase molecular restructuring array is ready for deployment, Dr. Whiskers announced from her position at the science station. But we need someone to coordinate the planetary distribution network. I'll do it, Jake said, settling into the communications chair. Jake, Commander Fuzz said gently, this requires coordinating with 47 different medical facilities across 6 continents, while simultaneously managing atmospheric delivery systems and monitoring real-time biological feedback from 3 billion individuals. So basically air traffic control, but with more lives at stake, Jake replied. I've got this. The next 8 hours were a testament to human stubbornness and the power of really, really good coffee. Jake coordinated the largest medical intervention in galactic history, from a maintenance bay on a remote space station, using nothing but determination, basic logistics knowledge, and an unhealthy amount of caffeine. When the first reports came in that the plague was actually retreating, that Flufarian vital signs were stabilizing across the homeworld, Jake was too exhausted to feel triumphant. He just slumped in his chair and watched the data streams showing 3 billion lives being saved by the collaborative effort of dozens of species working together. Uncle Death, Pip said softly, climbing onto Jake's lap. You saved everyone. We all saved everyone, Jake corrected, looking around at the assembled aliens who had worked tirelessly for 3 days straight. I just helped coordinate things. No, Admiral Grumpus said, his voice unusually quiet. You did something we thought was impossible. You made the galaxy work together, not through military force or political maneuvering, but through simple appeals to our better nature. Jake looked at the holographic display showing the Flufarian homeworld, where the crisis was finally ending. Children who had been dying were now playing in the streets. Families were reuniting. An entire civilization had been pulled back from the brink of extinction. You know what? Jake said, smiling for the first time in days. Maybe being Uncle Death isn't the worst job in the galaxy. Pip purred and snuggled closer. Does this mean you'll keep protecting us? Jake looked around at all the faces staring at him hopefully. Not just the Flufarian cubs, but representatives from dozens of species who had just learned that sometimes the galaxy could work together when it mattered most. Yeah, kid, Jake said. I think I can do that. 6 months later, Jake stood in what used to be his cramped maintenance quarters, looking at the bronze plaque that read, Uncle Death Foundation, Galactic Headquarters, and wondering how his life had become so wonderfully, ridiculously complicated. The space had been expanded to accommodate what could only be described as organized chaos. One corner housed a state-of-the-art crisis coordination center, where Jake could manage emergency responses across 17 star systems. Another corner had been converted into a classroom, where he taught basic empathy and cooperation to bewildered alien diplomats who couldn't understand why asking nicely worked better than filing official requests in triplicate. But the heart of the operation was the playroom, where at any given moment, dozens of alien cubs from various species could be found treating Jake like a combination jungle gym, storyteller, and cosmic protector. Today's crowd included not just Flufarians, but also young crystallins who chimed like wind chimes when they laughed, Silicon Empire younglings who built impossible geometric structures out of blocks, and a pair of Gosh Confederation pufflings who kept accidentally floating into the ceiling. Uncle Death, called out Zero, a young crystalline whose species communicated through harmonic frequencies that made Jake's teeth ache in the most pleasant way. The quantum monk offspring are having another existential crisis about whether they actually exist. Jake looked over to where 3 small, hooded figures sat in a circle, engaged in what appeared to be very serious philosophical debate about the nature of reality. At 6 years old, they were already more intellectually advanced than most graduate students, but they still needed someone to remind them to eat lunch and explain why pulling each other's robes wasn't appropriate conflict resolution. Hey kids, Jake called to the young quantum monks. Reality check time. You exist because I can see you. You're having thoughts, and Pip keeps stealing your juice boxes. Therefore, you are real enough to participate in today's group activity. One of the young monks looked up. But Uncle Death, what if our perception of existence is merely a collective delusion shared by... What if we build a blanket fort instead? Jake interrupted gently. We can debate the nature of reality from inside it. Reality is always more comfortable with proper blanket architecture. The philosophical crisis immediately dissolved into excited chattering about fort construction techniques, and Jake made a mental note to add junior existential counselor to his increasingly bizarre resume. Jake, came Dr. Whisker's voice from the communication center. We're getting reports of a trade dispute between the Mineral Consortium and the Energy Collective that's about to turn into a shooting war. Both sides are requesting Uncle Death mediation. Jake sighed and looked at the cubs, who were now enthusiastically building what appeared to be a blanket fort designed by committee, which is to say it looked like a small textile explosion but somehow remained structurally sound. "Pip, you're in charge while I'm gone," Jake announced. "Uncle Death," Pip replied seriously, puffing out his chest. "I will guard the fort from existential threats and ensure optimal juice box distribution." 20 minutes later, Jake found himself on a three-way holographic call with two alien species who had been fighting over mining rights for so long that they'd forgotten what they were originally arguing about. The Mineral Consortium representative looked like a walking boulder with delusions of grandeur, while the Energy Collective delegate resembled a sentient lightning storm having a bad hair day. "So, let me get this straight," Jake said, rubbing his temples. "You're ready to start a war because you can't agree on who has the right to extract resources from a planet that neither of you actually lives on. The contractual obligations clearly state," the mineral representative began. "And the energy output specifications obviously indicate," the energy delegate interrupted. "Okay, stop," Jake said, using his best disappointed dad voice that somehow worked on every species he'd encountered. "Here's what we're going to do. Minerals, you need energy to power your extraction equipment. Energy, you need minerals to build your collection infrastructure. Instead of fighting over the planet, why don't you share it and split the profits?" Both aliens stared at him through the hologram, as if he'd just suggested they solve their problems by learning to tap dance. "Share?" the mineral representative asked slowly. "Split profits?" the energy delegate added, sounding like Jake had spoken in an ancient, forgotten language. "It's this crazy concept where everyone gets what they need and nobody has to die," Jake explained. "Very popular among humans." 3 hours later, Jake had somehow negotiated the galaxy's first interspecies resource-sharing cooperative, complete with profit-sharing agreements and a joint environmental protection clause that he'd thrown in because the planet apparently had some very pretty crystals that would be a shame to destroy. When he returned to the Foundation headquarters, he found that the Cubs had somehow expanded their blanket fort to encompass most of the room and were in the process of declaring it an independent nation. "Uncle Death," Zero chimed excitedly, "we've established the Blanket Fort Republic and written a constitution. Article 1 states that all beings are entitled to adequate snack distribution. Article 2, added a young silicon named Geometric Pattern 7, establishes Uncle Death as our permanent ambassador to the outside world." Jake looked at the elaborate fort structure, complete with multiple rooms, a flag, made from Dr. Whisker's spare lab coat, and what appeared to be a functioning government system based entirely on fairness and sharing snacks. "You know what?" Jake said, crawling into the fort and accepting the tiny crown that Pip had apparently woven from spare electrical wire. "I accept the position." As he sat, surrounded by dozens of alien children from across the galaxy, all of whom looked at him like he hung the stars personally, Jake reflected on how dramatically his life had changed. He'd gone from a guy who just wanted to fix broken air recyclers to someone who fixed broken relationships between entire civilizations. The really strange part was that he was actually good at it, not because he had any special powers or mystical abilities, but because he approached every problem with the same basic philosophy. Most people wanted to do the right thing, they just needed someone to help them figure out what that was. "Uncle Death," Pip said, snuggling up against Jake's side, "are you happy being our protector?" Jake looked around at the faces of children from dozens of different worlds, all united by the simple belief that the universe could be a better place if people just tried to take care of each other. He thought about the trade war he'd just prevented, the plague response he'd coordinated, and the hundreds of small crises he'd helped resolve just by treating everyone involved like reasonable people who deserved to be heard. "You know what, Pip?" Jake said, adjusting his tiny wire crown and reaching for his coffee mug, which had been decorated with crayon drawings by at least 6 different species. "Yeah, I think I am." Through the viewport, Jake could see ships from dozens of worlds docking at the station, bringing more families who wanted their children to meet Uncle Death, more diplomats who needed help solving problems that seemed impossible until someone suggested they'd try being nice to each other, and more proof that sometimes the galaxy just needed someone willing to fix what was broken. Jake Morrison had wanted to be a simple maintenance worker, and in the end, that's exactly what he'd become. He just hadn't realized that sometimes what needed fixing wasn't machinery, but the connections between people who had forgotten how to talk to each other. "All right, everyone," Jake announced to his Blanket Fort cabinet meeting. "Who wants to help Uncle Death prevent the next galactic crisis?" The chorus of alien voices that answered him was probably the best sound in the universe. even if he still had no idea how he was going to explain any of this to his mother when he finally called home.